Okay, let's go live. Hi everyone, my name's Kevin. I'll be hosting today's webinar. It's called This Voices in Education. And yeah, we're going to get started right at 8 a.m. Eastern. That is the time for that. Well, I believe that's 1 p.m. Yeah. I'm gonna just hang out here with you guys. So that. So, see all right. From the discussion. It's really exciting. I'm going to keep reading it. And we're going to start just a couple minutes after Logan Eastern so that there are many people who join a couple minutes late, so we can still catch right in the beginning. I mean, in the meantime, I guess we can just sort of go through a little brief overview of the presentation, which I'll also cover in a few minutes, but maybe this will be for those people who are doing it a bit early. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the experiences that I've been able to get into investigating how youth voices are and are not heard in our education system. I'll be focusing particularly on the U.S. education system because that's the one that I'm most familiar with. Particularly within the U.S., I'm from South Carolina. I'm sure you have an author that is. So this is what's happening. Right there. So yeah, so I'm from there, and I've been working in issues related to education in a variety of ways since I've been about 14, and now I am 21. So okay, well, I don't like to start things too late. We'll wait for like 15 or seconds. And I'm trying to make this at least a little bit interactive. So there'll be a couple points for questions if anyone has any. And I'd love for you to contribute in the chat in YouTube. In the YouTube. So I'm not sure if you can press chat message, but I put the YouTube link there in case for some strange concern. Some by some strange way you're watching it. Maybe looking up instead of in the YouTube link, but I think you're watching it in the YouTube channel. Okay, so it is 8:02 Eastern. We're going to begin our presentation. My presentation. It's already starting off so well. All right, so let's go ahead and screen share and 3, 2, 1, go. Okay, well, hope you can see this. Okay, so my presentation is called Youth Voices in Education. And students can take back control over their life. And I want to start with a question to everyone. Now, this will obviously depend on whether they're equal in the chat. Well, or it can depend on if you're sort of at home and following along. But I want you to think about the time when you last talked about a content issue in school. What did you talk about? So let's just try and see if we get a response or two from the chat. But I think there are too many people watching this now, so maybe we can wait for just like 15 seconds between answers. In the meantime, I'll go over my introduction just a little bit. So again, yeah, my name is Kevin. I'm a student in South Carolina, United States. I'm a student from South Carolina in the States, and I have been working on education-related issues. Yeah, been working on education-related issues for the past 8 years, starting from an organization that I founded called TEDx Youth at Columbia. It's a by youth for youth TEDx event that serves students all over South Carolina, and we all come together in Columbia, South Carolina, for one day out of the year. I've sort of through being exposed to how learning can happen in a variety of ways, particularly through TED Talks and other sort of non-traditional learning experiences. I've become more interested in education systems and what sort of say in education students have. If you look at a lot of our institutions, like the governments, particularly democracies, businesses, you'll see relationships between the providers and the receivers of the goods. So whether it's someone who is a representative of a constituency that a group of people that he or she is representing, or they are representing, or a buyer that I'm necessarily sell it to a buyer. The buying power is always in the hands of the people who are receiving the good or service. That's kind of backwards in education. So if you look at the way in which a lot of education is structured, particularly higher education in the States, most of the power is with the people in charge, not necessarily the people who are receiving and usually paying for the education, again, particularly in the States. So I've noticed this sort of disparity in education, and that's why I've been working on issues related to youth voices and education. So let's see, like no one has something on the chat. Just as a reminder, I'm trying to get this a little bit more active. So if you have any questions that pop into your head during the presentation, please type them into the chat, and I'll leave some for Q&A at the end as well. Okay. With that, let's jump back into the presentation. We're going to screen share, and I should be able to see my screen. All right. So I hope you thought about last time you talked about a controversial issue in school. I think the last time that I talked about a controversial issue in school was probably as part of a lecture that I attended in my architecture class. That was, let's see, a week or so ago. We talked about the ethics behind sort of Facebook's use of all of people's data. I mean, I don't know if that's a super controversial issue, but it's relatively controversial. The reason I ask this question is because in our education system, at least the one that I'm used to, all of this is kind of the U.S. education-based perspective, but at least in my education, there wasn't really a forum where students could talk about important global controversial issues that affected them day to day. That's something that I wanted to fix when I came out of high school because I realized that, or at least I thought I realized that that was the reason why I came out of high school not sort of being able to critically discuss other people's perspectives on ideas. So I had a friend who challenged my views on abortion, um, and I noticed that my immediate reaction to his challenging me was I started getting defensive and sort of reacted emotionally as opposed to logically. And that's something that I wanted to help address because I saw that as a problem, the fact that I couldn't respond logically to another logical argument. Um, so within the organization that I founded called TEDx in Columbia, I created a program called TEDx Youth at Columbia Schools. And the mission of this program is to give youth voice in schools through TED Talks. What that means is we have about 20 to 50 schools every year that partner with our organizations to help sort of run and implement this program. And in each one of our schools, we have a teacher who's called an ambassador. Um, we choose a person at the school who is highly involved in the school, who sort of knows what's going on with the students, who has a good read on how the students like feel in a reaction to current global events. And the teacher is the one who's responsible for making sure that the club has a space to meet and has a platform. So if that means creating an official student organization so that the students can meet, that's one option. If it means talking to an administrator so that students can have certain rights and privileges, that might be another thing that they do. But this ambassador is essentially in charge of making sure that the students have a place. On top of that, they do a lot of promotion within their schools so that people know that this weekly event is happening at their schools. And we stay in touch. We, as in our team who runs the conference, stays in touch with the ambassador through weekly emails or updates. So we might send alerts to post on social media or check in with them for 10 minutes once a week. Next, we also have two student leaders at school. So they work with our ambassadors, and the purpose of the student leader, the purpose, or I guess the objective for each student leader is to be able to facilitate dialogue around each of the controversial issues that we choose. So we have a curriculum of anywhere between 10 to 15 issues per year that we choose. They've ranged from climate justice and climate change to racism, gender issues, gender equality, issues with the media, politics, bias in education systems. So things that are sort of in the news all the time, but the students can't talk about in school because there's no platform for it. We aim to create that platform by having this list of not only topics, but with each one, a few TED Talks and a few ways to engage around that issue, which I'll talk about in a second. So this sort of set of conversations is called idea dialogue. The reason why it's called idea dialogues and not idea debates, ideas conversations, ideas discussions, because a dialogue is fundamentally different from a discussion. But roughly speaking, a debate is typically an argument that's had between two people or at least two sides of an issue. And the point of the debate is for one person to be proven right and the other person to be proven wrong, usually at all costs. But the purpose of a discussion is more open-ended. So it's not necessarily to arrive at a solution like a debate aims to do, but it's more sort of open-ended in that you can have a wide variety of perspectives and ideas shared during a discussion. A dialogue, however, is unique in that it takes into account everyone's humanity in a discussion. So you recognize that people have different views on certain issues, but you don't just say, okay, well, your view on abortion or climate change or whatever is this way, mine is this way, oh, you're wrong, I'm right. But rather you would say, well, I understand you have a different view on this particular issue, and this is why. And maybe you ask the person a few sort of follow-up questions so that you can better understand what influenced them to have that perspective. It might be something in their background, it might be something like their heritage, where they grew up, who they stepped in front of. So that's the first and foremost point. It's a dialogue. And the key to a dialogue, at least for us, is to build understanding first and then act later. So once you understand what that issue is, you'll be able to act on it in a more appropriate and we think more cohesive way. And that you'll be able to, in a more holistic way, understand how that issue connects to other issues, policies, existing movements, and what's happening around that issue, etc. So as I mentioned, well, I think this team was actually a little bit, but our number of topics between 12 and 15 every year, and we start in the spring semester. So for schools in South Carolina, that starts right after our winter break on January 1st, and we go right up until our conference, which typically happens in March. Each one of these weekly sessions lasts between an hour to 2.5 hours, and they take place in school during lunch or advisory periods, and sometimes occasionally after school. What's unique about these dialogues that you typically won't find in other settings, particularly in the education system, is that they are completely student-led. The teacher's only responsibility is to secure the skills like I mentioned. So that means that the students are in charge of dialogue, which means that others who are participating, not necessarily the ones who are leading, but the ones who are participating should, in theory, feel more comfortable sharing controversial opinions and maybe ideas that they normally couldn't share in class. It's our sort of goal that students be able to talk about these issues in a way that they don't ever feel afraid to share a particular perspective. Because as we all know, nothing is worse than being afraid to think about or discuss or debate with someone a perspective that might not be that popular. And sometimes the people who you're discussing or dialoguing about this issue with, you might not know their perspectives or their temperament or how they might react to you talking about a particular issue. So it can sometimes be a little bit unsafe or risky to talk about those issues. Our goal is for students to be, slightly uncomfortable talking about tough topics, but not to the point where they feel unsafe. And that's why these are completely student-led discussion or dialogues rather. So the students who attend 50% or more of these dialogues are then eligible to apply to attend our event. Our event happens in March, like I mentioned earlier. So those are the students who sort of attend the dialogues who then are able to come to our annual event. For each topic, we work with special curators, which are individuals or organizations with expert insight who recommend 3 to 5 TED or TEDx talks around that topic, 3 to 5 open-ended specific dialogue questions around that topic, and 7 to 10 activations around that topic. Activations are just a way to engage, are ways to engage with that issue. To give you an example of who a special curator might be, last year we worked with the United Nations Association for our topic on human rights. This past year we worked with the Gun Violence Prevention Group, March for Our Lives, which I'm sure most of you are likely familiar with, for our topic on gun violence prevention. Additionally, special curators provide contact information so that students can reach out with questions or ideas that they might have. So let's say you've spent an hour talking about how gun violence has maybe affected you or your community. You then have access to one person at a gun violence prevention organization who can give you more information and help connect you with additional people who could help inspire you further. So I mentioned the student leaders idea earlier. So those are those 2 students who lead, who facilitate the dialogue in our schools once a week. The way this works is that students split up the TED Talks that we send them. So you might remember we send 3 to 5 TEDx Talks. They split up these TED Talks, so maybe one takes 2, another one takes 3. They'll watch them at home and they'll take notes and sort of pause and make key points. And they'll write down, this talk was particularly interesting at 2 minutes and 55 seconds because the speaker said this, and I really enjoyed hearing this perspective on blah blah blah. But I'm wondering how that could be applied in another context. So maybe let's get some variety. So maybe you're listening to Sir Ken Robinson's seminal talk on creativity, and you find that the example that he used about the girl who couldn't sit still in class you think maybe that might relate to some other students in class. So you might pause the talk at that point, and then you could say during the actual dialogue, hey, does anyone else feel like they could relate to that? So this is an important part of our ideal dialogue model because it gives the students a chance to sort of act as a guide and a facilitator, not necessarily as a teacher. In the U.S. school system, I think teachers are typically pretty instructive and prescriptive, which I would say means they are the authority on how education works in the education system, which I don't think is actually true or ought to be true. So the students then get to act in sort of this mentor or guide or facilitator role where they can present these different ideas and perspectives for the others who are participating in the discussion to bounce off of and follow along. So those student leaders stop the TED Talks, they'll watch them at home, and then they will take notes and document key points. So that they can be prepared to do this entire process. We run a training webinar for them where the students from all the schools that I mentioned earlier will participate in a usually 30 to 45-minute Skype session so that they can become familiar with how to create a dialogue-friendly climate, how to make sure that everyone has a voice in the discussion, how to start a conversation, how to lose room for help with silence, etc. So those are all sort of techniques that those dialogue facilitators can use in their dialogues so that students will feel more comfortable talking and there are any lulls in the conversation or awkward moments, they can know what to do and how to react appropriately. All of these techniques come from Stanford University's Teaching Commons Institute, which is a resource that provides sort of resources for educators, and we use specifically the ones for small group dialogue. And all of these student leaders will send an FAQ sheet with deadlines, very clear timelines, and explanation of who TEDx Columbia is, who TED is, what TED Talks are. So I also want to talk about our youth team that runs this entire program. So when I started this conference in 2014, I had a goal in my mind that I wanted to create something that would represent the young people of Columbia and that would give them a platform which they could learn about and spread ideas. In doing that, one of the most important points, or one of the most important characteristics of the conference was that it was truly by youth for youth. In the beginning, I thought that that meant only young people could be the team members of our organizing. But in fact, I then sort of changed my mind and thinking more and more this way over the past, I would say 3 years or so, where our model is now, rather than totally youth-led, it's youth-driven, but adult-supported. So that means that at key points during our planning process, for instance, when we fundraise, when we select speakers, when we coach our speakers and prepare them to give TEDx talks, we consult adults who are experts in those subject areas so that, a lot of the time we as young people don't have expertise on particular issues simply because of our age. We just haven't been long enough to know the world. But there are plenty of adults who both have that expertise, but also very importantly, believe in our young people to take that expertise and apply it to their own projects and endeavors, initiatives, etc. So our model has now become youth-led and adult-supported. That for us has changed because we are now able to come to adults with additional credibility whenever we ask for funding or support or resources of any kind and tell them we already have this person on board, so they could even recommend us to say X, Y, Z. And that idea of having an adult support you as a young person when you're advocating for any issue, whether it's education or other inequities or other issues altogether, that can actually be a very key part of any movement that you as a young person need. So I would encourage you to take some time to think about in the issues that you're involved with, are there any adults who might be supportive of them contributing to your project in an advisory way. So maybe not necessarily as a decision maker in your project, and you leave all the decision making up to the other people, but could they support you in advisory capacity so that if you have specific questions, you have a particular person that you know will always be available to answer a specific type of question. Let's go ahead and jump back to the slide. So we talk about, even though we are an all-volunteer team, whenever we bring on people to our team, we use the terms hire and fire. Well, I guess we don't fire people, but when we bring them on the team, that would be stupid. But we say that we fired people when they attend. Well, okay. You understand what I mean? I'm not too complicated anymore. So anyway, we use those terms because even though we are a volunteer team, that establishes a greater sense of commitment. And that is probably important in these movements, I think, because you want to make sure that the people who are on your team have signed up for the right reasons. We've had a struggle with this issue, to be honest, over the past few years, and we've tried to address it by creating a more rigorous team application. And in our team application, we ask people questions such as motivational questions, like why do you want to apply to join our team? Skills-based questions, so how do you anticipate contributing to our organization? And we also ask them for an adult reference and a peer reference. A lot of the time in sort of student organizations or organizations requiring any sort of application, the references are limited to adults, but we figured, well, for a body-important conference and organization, why not have that be reflected in how we select our team members? So that is why we ask for peer references and adult references. And because we are a youth team, so what I mean, what I mean specifically by that is everyone on our team except for me is a high school student, and they are between 14 and 22. I'm 21, so obviously I'm not a high school student anymore. But I'm the only adult on the team, and a lot of the same issues that I've been going through as a young person, that I went through, and to some extent am still going through as a young person, I've noticed in other team members. So I try to address that through mentorship opportunities for self-improvement and growth. So I'll check in with all the team members every quarter to talk with them and ask them, hey, how's your time going on your team? Is there anything that we can do to make your experience better? What are some challenges that you've been running into recently? I find that particularly with high school students and below, they are not always used to or comfortable voicing disagreement on particular issues. What I mean by that is that if there's an issue that a young person has with the way something is running, whether it's an organization or part of how a team structures their meetings or what have you, they are not always comfortable talking about that disagreement unless prompted. So as a leader and as a sort of mentor for young people, you should be wary of this, or I guess mindful of this, and provide opportunities for young people to express their opinions on these issues openly. So the space should be safe and it should be a welcoming one, and you should, and maybe even you could read with a couple of examples of things that you thought were going on, so that they know, oh well, this person is the leader of our organization, understands that there's something going on. I'm free to talk about it too. So that's another piece of advice here to someone thinking about how to best approach youth voices when we're talking about feedback. Wow, that's really awesome. Okay. So another thing we do is periodic check-ins as necessary to help improve productivity. So our students will sometimes come to the realization that they can't complete a certain amount of their tasks or assignments per week. Sometimes they won't always realize that by themselves. It might take a little bit of them sort of failing at a couple things. So they might turn in a few things late, and I or another leader on the team might just that they've been doing things late. So we'll check in and we'll ask them, hey, is there anything on your team? I'm sorry, is there anything on your mind, or has been something going on in your life that's preventing you from completing your assignments on time, or if not, is it simply an issue of time management? And if so, we work with them on specific strategies on time management. Finally, I want to talk about the why behind this whole organization, the idea of it being misled our schools program. So this is a quote from one of our attendees who later became a team member. She writes, with a diverse set of presentations came a diverse set of takeaways, which I wrote down in my program so I wouldn't forget. The largest takeaway for me is if a variety of people could use their passions to improve the world, perhaps I could also make an impact on the world. That's Elizabeth, and I think this quote is pretty key to understanding why we do a lot of what we do. It's to build that understanding around issues that later can drive action around those same issues. We do that both through our conference, like I mentioned earlier, but also through our dialects program. And that's one thing that as a young person, if you want to have an effective voice on any sort of issue, it can definitely help to take some time to understand it. So with that, I want to pause before I move on to the next section. Ask if there are any questions. Not seeing any questions in the chat. So please comment. Good to meet you. So there are no questions. Go ahead and move on to the next section. So when was the last time that you noticed youth voice being disregarded? And this is being disregarded in any sort of forum around any sort of issue. Maybe take 30 seconds to think about it, and there's someone who tells you answer in the chat. That's just very cool. I like that. Okay. And now let's talk about the question, when was the last time you noticed youth voice being disregarded in education? Let's see if we'll do 5 or 10 seconds to think about that. So the reason why I ask this is because there are a lot of youth movements that have been taken off over the past year. Probably here in Europe, you've heard of Greta Thunberg, who's been leading the Fridays for Future campaign, aiming to get people to care and take action on climate change. If you're in the US, you're probably familiar with the gun violence prevention movement that popped up after the shooting in Parkland. But despite the fact that young people have the greatest stake in today's issues, because we're the ones who are going to be living with them for the next 20, 30, 50, 60 years, we are the ones who are usually least listened to when it comes to these very issues. In education, it's unfortunately no different. And I want to take some time now to talk about a research project that I've been working on with my university called New Sound Entitled, How to Improve Architectural Education. And actually, this is working in my work academic project right now. I call it this because I had a conversation with a professor one time about how youth voice is disregarded when it comes to curriculum design in architecture. I'm going to be studying architecture in school, in university, rather. And their response to my concern was, well, you sound entitled because you, as a student, should be grateful for everything that you're receiving as part of your education. And I actually don't think that that's the case. I don't think just because you're getting something that you should automatically accept it and not question it. Yes, you should be grateful, but there's definitely room within that to question the effectiveness. To question the effectiveness of anything that you are a part of, whether it's your education or social systems or institutions, what have you. So one way that I like to talk about this issue is to frame it in the context of other transactions that we see in our world, and two in particular that we see that have a similar relationship but a different outcome are the relationships between a buyer and seller, so maybe a vendor and the recipient of a product, good or service. And an elected official and their constituents. So if we look at both of these relationships, people who are sort of providing the bidder service, so of course in the case of the business transaction, it's the seller. I think I might have reversed that example earlier. In the case of the business transaction, it's the seller who's providing the bidder service. In the case of a politician, versus their constituent, it's obviously them who is providing the representation of the voice of the people that they represent. So both of those relationships, if the people who are receiving that service don't like what they're getting, they have the buying power. They have the control to either elect a person out of office or stop buying that product, which means that those people are then accountable to those constituents or the buyers who they're providing the service to. It's actually not the case in our education system, particularly in higher education. And I can be pretty confident about this in the American education system. Like I said earlier, that's what I'm used to, so I'm not necessarily as familiar. Well, I'm not as familiar with other international education systems, but in our education system, how I was sort of raised was that the teacher has the ultimate say over what happens in the classroom. So everything from how instruction is designed to what the curriculum is to how long you spend doing certain homework assignments to if you get homework, what kind of homework that is, to how the teacher will be delivering the content. All of that is in the hands of the teacher. And you might wonder, as the student who spends 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week in the classroom, and sometimes more time in school if you're spending time getting tutoring or other assistance or maybe athletics, why don't you have a say in the way that this education is being delivered to you? I'm not advocating necessarily that students be able to say, well, let's not have any homework entirely, even though that is the case actually in some school education systems. But they should at least be able to be heard so that their opinions can seriously be considered and so that their options are on the table and are as evenly sort of weighted as opinions of teachers, administrators, faculty, people who have been in the education system for a long time. Why that's necessary is because students bring a different perspective on education that faculty and administrators don't always have. What that means is that students are the ones who are actually receiving that education. So they know what works and what doesn't. They know what's useful, what's not, what's boring, and what's fun in terms of activities, curricula, and other sort of concerns and issues. I did see the comment about the noise. Unfortunately, there's not much I can do. I do apologize. So I started this project after seeing how this issue of youth voices not being heard in the education system this issue was particularly present in my school of architecture. I'm of course biased, but I think that if there's any place where students' voices should be heard, it's in architecture school, because typically students spend between 10 to 20, sometimes 25 hours a week outside of class in the architecture school working on their projects, which means that if their time isn't being used well, all of their other time that's being sacrificed to go towards architecture is then being limited for nothing. Students who are in architecture school are required to spend these 10 to 25 hours per week outside of class to improve their projects, and that's really what's necessary to get an A or an B in their architecture classes. So if there's anywhere where students' voices and feedback should be listened to for the sake of using the time effectively, I would argue it's architecture school. But that actually is not happening in our school of architecture. So our professors, even though they had some sort of formal and old-fashioned opportunities to get feedback from students, they weren't ever taking time to listen to students in a more informal, low-effort, intentional, and systematic way. And those are some of the ways that I want to highlight that I'm currently desiring. So in looking at sort of current ways that youth voice is talked about and treated in education, as I just mentioned, it's common that students' voices are largely disregarded in both K-12 and grammar school, grade school, and in higher education, in universities. And this is despite the availability of assessment tools. So that means that sometimes schools will ask students to take what are called EOC and course evaluations, which might sound like a good idea if you're trying to come up with a quick solution to this problem, but in fact, they're really not. Because typically what happens is the students who end up taking the survey are the ones who are most and least satisfied. You'll get a lot of those sort of outliers and very few people in the middle to help you understand what's working and what's not about instruction curriculum. So that means that you, as someone who just took this course, yes, are able to give feedback, but that feedback no longer is useful because you're not able to give specific feedback per, for instance, project in your architectural curriculum over the course of a semester, or based on a particular teacher over the course of a semester. At least that's how it works in the course. And that brings me to a question, and I've sort of hinted at this a little bit, but I want to ask you to think about this. What are the problems with little youth voice in education? What can result from young people not having a voice in their education? I'm going to take maybe 5 to 10 seconds to bring some responses in the Hangout in the YouTube So, as I sort of hinted at earlier, if professors or teachers don't have a way to gather the feedback around their instruction, then they don't have a way to improve it. And in a lot of our education systems, you'll be surprised to learn about how many professors don't even have the opportunity to gather that data, gather the feedback from students. If you don't even have access to that data, it doesn't matter if you want to use it or not. If you don't even have the chance to use it. So it's critical, I think, to come up with a system that can be put into place so that students have that chance to give feedback that has a few different criteria. It's low effort, it's systematic, and it's intentional. This system. Low effort means that it can be done in 5 to 10 minutes. It's something that will be incentivized to students so that they won't be thinking each time they have to do a survey or do feedback in some way, oh, this is such a hassle, such an annoyance. I don't want to do this. It'll be more like, oh, cool, this is my chance to finally give feedback on something that I really care about, something that will improve my education and hopefully use my time then. Systematic means it'll happen in a way that is in a way, or rather, it'll be structured in a systematic way. I'm trying to not use the word systematic, but I guess an example of this means an example of this could be happening every week, every month, every 2 months, so that you can track the performance of key indicators over time. So maybe if students take one of these surveys, and one of the questions is, how useful was this project on a scale from 1 to 10? In the beginning of the semester, they might rate that as 1. At the end of the semester, they might rate it as 10. So having a systematic system, for lack of a better word, in place means that you can track the sort of change that happens in those two entities. Intentional means that you're asking specific questions around projects as opposed to course-wide feedback. In architecture school, this means that you typically get assigned 3 to 4 projects over the course of the semester. And of course, this varies, but it's typically around 3 to maybe some activities there are. And those end of course evaluations typically provide you the chance to give feedback on the course as a whole as opposed to specific projects. So having an intentional feedback system means that you'll be able to tailor those questions to specific projects or even to specific parts of the project. And I'm currently designing a system that solves this problem, and I'll be piloting it in the Clemson University School of Architecture. That's the university that I'm over the next year or so. I'm going to pause to see if there are any questions. Wait 5 seconds. Move on. Okay. So if you want to have a voice in any sort of issue, you should have not only the understanding, which is sort of the first part of the presentation that we talked about. You want to have not only that understanding, but also know how to take action on the issue. So my next sort of prompted question is, what are effective ways to improve youth's ability to fight for change? And again, 5 to 10 seconds. If you learn posters YouTube. So this is a question that I've been thinking about over the past couple of years, and particularly because I've been noticing that in a lot of youth-led movements, there is a lot of action, but sometimes little understanding around those hot button controversial issues. But what I'm talking about is you might be familiar with the movements that I sort of mentioned earlier on climate change or gun violence prevention, or the other movements fighting racism, bias, media, and related issues. Um, in some instances, not in all instances, but in some instances of sort of action around those issues, we will see that there is a large sort of push towards action in the form of rallies, strikes, marches, and protests. But at the same time, those people leading those forms of actions don't always have an understanding of why those actions are the ones that need to be taken and how those actions relate to larger institutions that govern the world and therefore govern those particular actions. And I'm talking about social, cultural, political, economic institutions that contribute to our understanding of the world and to other systems that impact how we as activists move change. So I noticed that issue particularly last summer, and through a project that I was involved with the Obama Foundation, I created this program called Design Understand Act. And Design Understand Act is called that way because it takes three key ideas. One is called design thinking, another one is understanding, and the third one is action. And when this all comes together is that it's a youth activism training, it's impact focus, and it's design thinking to bridge the gap between understanding and action. We're the first youth activism training that uses design thinking and is impact focus. And the idea behind this is that we'll be able to help young people both create their action plans as those as participants in this activism program, leave the program and enter back into the world of activism. But also, we'll be able to help those young people understand what are effective ways of creating change around certain issues. So if you're impact focused, it means that at the end of the day, you are worried about what will produce the highest amount of long-term change, which means that you can respond to things that don't directly relate to or contribute to that goal, and instead focus on the ones that do. We'll be selecting 20 young activists between the ages of 14 and 18 in Columbia, South Carolina, to participate in this program, and it's currently scheduled for late summer late summer of this year. So if you want to find out more information, we have a pretty bare bones website at the moment, but it's DesignUnderstandAct.org. And you can sign up for updates if you want to get involved somehow or learn more about this. One of our goals with this program is that we will be sharing as many of our resources that we create as possible with the public, so that hopefully people can take our experience and use it to their advantage and hopefully produce other awesome opportunities for young people, specifically to improve youth activism. So that sort of last part of my presentation kind of for me represents how this idea of understanding leading to action can then be strengthened and bolstered through a specific and very intentional approach. So that's it. That's my presentation on youth voices in education. I know we're not quite in an hour yet, but I do want to leave room for Q&As. And I guess, yeah, if you have any questions about my presentation or my work or any of my projects, I'll be happy to clear it up. And I guess if there are no questions, maybe after a couple minutes, I'll log off. If you want to stay in touch, just hit me up on social media. I have my social media listed in the description of this. But still hasn't had or Twitter, I'm not very super active on them, but yeah. Time for any questions. Okay, well, it doesn't look like there are any questions at the moment. So if you have any questions, again, feel free to reach out on social media. And yeah, I think it's for everyone's time. I appreciate this opportunity. Thank you to both Kingdom Workers and particularly to Courtney for setting this up. Yeah, I look forward to seeing what y'all do with these resources. And again, my pleasure. Bye, everyone.